Alright, hi everyone, welcome back. So we got another game sent in, we got a new video, and so this one was sent in by Talclone. He's a pretty strong player. Now this one's an interesting game, because this one is man versus machine, we'll say, because it's a computer as the black pieces, and our user's playing as the white ones. Okay. So let's take a look at this. Okay, so e4, c6, d4, and g6. Typically, when someone plays c6, in most cases they usually play the Caro-Kann. But in this case, g6, and there are some variations that do that. It's not as frequent though, but it happens. Okay. Okay, knight f3. Bishop g7, and bishop d3. So just normal development. You know, his opponent has given him some free say in the center, so he takes it. Okay, d6. And castling. It kind of has a similar structure to, like, you know, the perk defense, I guess, or the modern. You know, different names and also different variations. And it's transposing, so it becomes difficult for me to really know which variation it is now. And okay, knight to f6, c3, yeah. So just supporting the center, cutting down that bishop's diagonal. Now it has less of a future because all these pawns. And you're just slowly supporting that center, just building. Okay. h3, and this is proper use of prophylaxis here. So prophylaxis is a preventative move. So right here, you know, if say something just like bishop e3, we'll just give an example. And sometimes players will make prophylactic moves that are unnecessary, but in this case h3 is pretty nice because if you just say develop with something like bishop e3, you know, maybe bishop g4 happens, and then there's this pin, and in this type of structure, it's difficult for black to really find good squares for the pieces because his position's a little bit more cramped, whereas white has a bit more space in the center. You know, maybe something like this, then white would have the bishop pair, but black's gotten rid of one of the minor pieces, and so space becomes less of an issue. But you know, still slight advantage due to the bishop pair. Anyways, let's go back to h3. In this case, you're just preventing any of that from happening. Okay, knight bd7 and knight a3. So I think that this knight on the side isn't as good, and I think that I see that he didn't want to block in the bishop and still wants to develop this knight. But the only thing is, I think that you could develop the bishop out to maybe g5 or e3, and then put the knight on d2, and I think that might be a little bit better because this knight wouldn't be off to the side. And you know, maybe after something like b5, then it becomes less certain what this knight is accomplishing here. And I think you maybe have to reroute it a little bit before it becomes an effective member of the army. Alright, but anyways, queen c7, rook e1, yeah, just continuing to build that center, keep it supported, develop your pieces to support it. Rook e8, bishop d2. Okay, and he has the same kind of idea that I would have, which we'll see in 1 second. After a5, queen c1. So I would have a very similar idea to try to just get rid of this bishop, because this bishop is, you know, protecting a lot of these squares around the king. If you can get the bishop exchanged, then suddenly these squares around the black king become a little bit less safe. And, you know, with fianchettoed bishop, or fianchettoed, however you say it, I've heard people call it both, but with a fianchettoed bishop, then this bishop becomes kind of the main defender of these squares. Okay, so b5, knight c2, b6, bishop h6, and so there you go. Same kind of idea I would have, get rid of this bishop. And here I think that when black takes, that's not so great. I think that, let's just make a random move for black. Let's just say he just moves the rook to f8. Just to give an example, and if takes, then at least the king could prevent the queen from coming to h6. So I don't think taking is quite as good because it allows the queen to come in. So yeah, a little bit less comfortable for black, I think. Okay, e5, because black really needs to hit back at the center. White has a 3-3 say in the center, so you have to counter it at some point. Knight e3, b4. And so here is a tough call for white. So here's the deal. So you can either take or retreat. Those are your two options. Obviously, you can take or retreat. You have two options. So the difficult thing becomes, do you take, which, okay, now, you would get a position like this, and where now this bishop, you've gotten rid of the piece, and black has a space disadvantage, so that's pretty good for him. He wants to get pieces off. Now, if you retreat, you do give the bishop an active diagonal. This isn't such a bad piece anymore. But if you do retreat, you are keeping pieces on the board, so it's kind of tough to say. Do you exchange and allow the exchange, to alleviate some of that space pressure? Or do you retreat and let the bishop find a slightly active diagonal? It's a difficult choice to make. But, I don't know, bishop c2 might be a little bit better just because you're keeping more pieces on the board. Which, when you have a space advantage, you want to keep the pieces on. It makes it a little more difficult for your opponent. But it's a difficult choice to make in this position. So which do you do? Okay, knight g5, and now this pawn is under some pressure because, the only thing preventing a checkmate is this knight. This knight isn't here. You can play queen takes on h7, and then king's forced to f8, and queen takes on f7 will be made. So this knight's the only thing really preventing mate right now. So it's not very comfortable. Queen d8, h4, and yeah, I think he wants to try to ram the pawn in. The kingside pawns, and that's what his goal is. Because again, this knight can't move, so if you play h5, the pawn has to take. Because, this knight wouldn't be able to take, because, as mentioned, the checkmate. Okay, knight f8, now there's two knights guarding the square. Okay, d takes, rook takes, rook a1. Now the last piece is joining the battle that hasn't moved yet. B takes, rook a7, f4, okay. Pushing the rook back. E5, okay. Yeah, and now where does this knight go? Does he retreat all the way to the back row where there's this other knight? So both knights are back here, or do you go to d5? So I think knight to e8 is better because it doesn't lose a pawn. But at the same time, it's very passive. But knight d5, and then here was played knight takes d5. Now here's a very interesting idea. Would be rook takes d5. With the idea that after c takes, knight can take, and then where is this rook going to go? I mean, it can't go to e6, because there's the knight on g5, and you could just gain the exchange back immediately. That's one possibility. And also, say he goes back, then there's knight f6. Yeah, and so there's a lot of dangerous things here. And say the rook goes over here, then you're dealing with some very dangerous threats because you got all these pieces all ganging up on h7. And yeah, a lot of dangerous things can happen because there's very little that can be done to prevent any mates, because that wouldn't be very pleasant. Alright, and that's just one example. Just to go for one type of variation that could happen, just to kind of get my idea. Alright, so back to the actual game. C takes, rook takes, f5, rook ed1, ed6 check, queen e3, attacks the pawn, but he sees it. Black attacks the rook, but defends. Capture, capture. And yeah, and here things can get are getting a little bit bad for the black king because there's this pin now on the back row that's happening. And yeah, and then the rook's defending the knight, so obviously not taking. Rook takes f8, and yeah, so king's position was pretty weak. I guess that's kind of an understatement because yeah, a lot of these squares around the king were not very safe for a long time. King takes e6, and then yeah, in a minute, black loses his queen, and then after this, it's pretty much over because once you go down a queen for a rook, it's not very difficult to win after that. So let's just go through this quickly, because once you're down queen for rook, it's pretty much over. And you could even simplify it further here. If rook takes rook, and that's queen versus one rook, which is even simpler. But at the same time, once it becomes queen and rook versus two rooks, it's pretty much done. Alright. And then a few more moves, and we'll have our checkmate. Alright, so in this time it looks like man beat the machine. Alright. So the only thing, or the one thing that I really would point out is the opportunity for that exchange sacrifice, which could have led to some dangerous possibilities back here, because it kind of becomes ingrained in you after a while that, like you just say, oh, well, I can't take that knight because it's lower value than this rook. And it becomes difficult to always think that pieces are all relative value. And I think that's something that happens to everyone. I mean, because when you start learning chess, you're taught, oh, this piece is worth this much, this piece is this much, blah blah blah, and then you have to unlearn that by saying, oh, well, that's a relative value, so that piece is only worth that much because of what it can do. Whereas, maybe if you take, maybe you're given some type of possibilities of getting this knight to a very dangerous square. And this knight is definitely, relatively, worth at least a rook, in my eyes. All these weak dark squares around the king. Alright. Well, I think that's good for this game. Let me end it by setting it to the final checkmate position. Alright. So, thanks for sending me in this game. It's a really nice one. We had a very nice battle between human and the AI. Alright. So, thanks for sending in this game. Send me more, everyone. That way I can keep making these videos. Alright. Bye.